بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب يسر وأعن يا كريم وافتح بالحق إنك الفتاح العليم. Try and keep the volume low, so apologies if I'm not entirely audible or if I collapse in a disagreeable fit of coughing. Appropriate that Bat Hero began with the words of the Tombo Aji. It's a classic, and it's worth thinking about why it has become a classic. The message could not be simpler. It's like a nursery rhyme, little doxology, a few things which we ought to be doing. It begins with the recommendation to recite Quran, and then it takes us through the obligation to pray at night. Probably he's referring to the tahajjud. And then it speaks about the necessity of keeping good company. And then he talks about fasting. Then he concludes with zikr. Remember, remember, he said. And then he ends with golden words that he will be a great man who does just one of these things. There's something in this that is emblematic of the wise, gentle, successful story of Islam in Java and more generally in the Nusantara. He's put his finger, radiyallahu an, and the verse is attributed to Sunan Bonang himself, on these quintessentially spiritual dimensions of the religion of Islam. Beginning, of course, with the Quran, and the Quran as the greatest miracle, the greatest mystery of Islam, is something that has to appeal to every conceivable human soul and mind. Fakhruddin Razi, the great philosophical theologian, dances with joy in his commentary on the Quran. That's his most energetic, his most sincere, in many ways his most impressive achievement. Shamsi Tabriz, the inspirer, the muse, if you like, of Maulana Rumi, calls the Quran the Ishq-Nameh, the book of love, in his ecstatic Azerbaijani strange way. What brought about that soul? Is there any chance that we will see the likes of those people again? We have any number of Muslim academics nowadays. People have become professors and churn out nice books with thousands of footnotes and get prizes. I know that world. But what the Ummah really needs is people who can write iconic little sparks of perfection, like the Tombo Ati, that every human being can listen to and take a deep breath and recognize Allah is in control, everything is fine. The big shot professor with his complex footnotes can't calm you down. But the soul of a Javanese sage still calms us down 5 centuries after he wrote those words. Those are the people we need in this age. When we speak of the renewal of the Ummah, it seems that the only thing that is truly going to renew us, to refresh us, to bring about an ihya, will be souls like that. How do we get to be like that? How do we find people like that? How do we remember people like that? They seem to be the pivot of the religion, the aqtab. They are the ones who are truly in the prophetic footsteps. They are the ones who have truly heard the commandment, Iqra. These awliya. Java had no fewer than 9 of them, but in Allah's generosity, more than 9. Every different pondok in Java will give you a different list of who the 9 were. That's just part of the limitlessness of the divine gift. Sunan Bonang, the producer of this marvel, and also his brother Sunan Jarat, very significant luminary in his own right. The sons of Sunan Ampel, the great beacon of Surabaya. Some of you may have been there and got some sense of how much love there is for the man and how great he must have been. A place of constant Quran. You go there and there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people reading Quran. It's a place of Quran. And his student, Sunan Giri, and his grandson, Sunan Kudus, one of the first things we see about the Wali Songo is that many of them are related. And this also is important. There's a lesson in this for ourselves. Islam operates in a communitarian way. We say the Ummah, 1.4 billion human beings, yes, the Ummah, all brothers and sisters, and that can be an amazing thing. But there's also neighborhood. So much in Islam is about respect for neighbor. There is also family. So much in Islam is about respect for family because of what the family can do. Sunan Ampel marries they say she was a Chinese aristocratic woman, and produces these extraordinary offspring that go out and transform the lives of many, including ourselves. We still hear that voice today, so far away, such a historic distance, in such a completely different environment, still touches us. Because of the quality of his fatherhood and the quality of his wife's motherhood and their creation of, in an often difficult world, a world where there were plenty of wars, plenty of religious difference, plenty of confusion, plenty of ignorance, plenty of superstition, plenty of dark forces, evil spirits. Java is populated not just by humans. In that difficult environment, that really challenging environment for da'wah, we find him bringing up this luminous family. Family matters. That's why we revere the Ahl al-Bayt in Islam. One of the points of the Ahl al-Bayt is to remind us of the importance of family. Such was the greatness of the chosen one, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Hazrati Khadija, and Imam Ali, and Fatima al-Batul. Such was the greatness of those people that they weren't like university professors writing footnotes but having problems with their families. Instead, so much of their life was family life and focused on the family. And that is not a detraction from the true life of the spirit, but of the essence. And the people of this region, and generally the peoples of the Ummah, have known the importance, is in this. Nowadays in Muslim countries and amongst Muslims in the West, there is a certain insularity. In other words, everybody's like a little island. Here is the Sikh community and they only marry amongst themselves. And here is the Afro-Caribbean community, and here is the Chinese community and others. In England, it's like this. Recently, people have started to break those barriers down. But among Muslims, very often, there is huge prejudice against marrying outside one's ethnic group. Well, that prejudice may be hindering the spread of the religion, particularly if it takes a particularly narrow form. You have to marry somebody who's from a particular family, who comes from a particular village, who has a particular skin colour, who speaks a particular dialect, otherwise the family won't come to the wedding. Very common among British Muslims, unfortunately, but common elsewhere. This had often been a feature of Java and the Nusantara before the arrival of Islam. So let's just think about what these very intermarried, multicultural Wali Songo were bringing about in the world which they entered. The Nusantara is at the center of the second of the pre-modern world's great trade routes. The best known one was the Silk Road. Europeans know about that because it ended with Europe, just about, although Europe was a very unimportant kind of cold appendage to it. So from Istanbul through Bursa, through Azerbaijan, through Iran to Samarkand, and then the cities of China, points east. An amazing cultural as well as commercial mercantile superhighway. But the other was to get to China by sea. And there's no way of getting to China by sea except through all of these islands with their straits and their passages and their pirates and their coral reefs and their dangers and their amazing richness. The islands also have treasures. Not so much gold and silver, ivory and things that were elsewhere, but spices. A lot of spices, the world's great spices. And also, it came to be things like coffee. Many of the things that make life worth living actually come from this part of the world. So, that great trade route, which is truly ancient, like the Silk Road, we don't know whoever first made that journey, and it was potentially enormously profitable, took people on their way from, say, Baghdad, all the way around Cochin, Malabar, Ceylon, and then down the coast, down this coast, and then through the islands, and then up to Canton and beyond. Fortunes could be made. Possibly the most promising commercial opportunities in the world before silver was discovered by the Europeans in South America was that incredibly rich trade route. And it's actually a lot cheaper to ship goods by sea than to load them onto camels, and you need a lot of camels and they die en route, and camels are kind of difficult. The Silk Road was not so profitable. So these places lie right at the centre of the great superhighway of the pre-15th century world. And everybody who came here was amazed. Matteo Ricci and Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, incredible prosperity. These were not sort of coral islands with a few cannibals. This was one of the world's great centres of civilization, and they immediately saw it when they came here. The architecture, the dress, the rituals, the dances, the music, and the spirituality. Because it was on this superhighway, which was also an information superhighway, not just a trade route, the culture was amazingly diverse, and Islam always thrives in places which are bridges between different worlds. So Muslims came early to this part of the world, and we don't really know reliably how early. It'd be great if we could build a little shrine at the place where somebody first said the Muslim prayer, the Salat, in this part of Sunan Bonan and by Sunan Kalijaga. And you see what they included and what they didn't include. You're really reminded of what Imam al-Ghazali says in his Al-Munqidh min al-Talal, where you can hear people, the fundamentalists of his day, the xenophobes of the day, saying, what are you doing taking things from Greek philosophy? A bunch of idol worshippers who all loved Neptune and Saturn and Demeter, and their gods slept with swans, and it was really a long way from anything we could have anything to do with. How can you learn from Plato and Aristotle? And the Imam says, it's like a money changer. Somebody who really knows gold and really knows his business in the money changer's souk in Baghdad can put his hand into a sack of coins, and he knows what's real gold and what isn't. So similarly, if you really know the Greek history and you really know the philosophy and Plato and Aristotle and the way in which Ibn Sina and others have brought them together in a very distinctive way using the matrix of the Arabic language, and you know that well, you too can discern what's useful. Logic, really useful, because it helps you to construct a good argument, and everybody needs to be able to offer good arguments in law, in theology, in everything. Certain ways of expressing the ethical life, lists of virtues and ways in which virtues relate to particular qualities of the soul. It's not the medical technology of the day. It's just the science of the day. You have to be very xenophobic indeed to reject it just because somebody outside your religious world invented it. So Imam al-Ghazali, and generally the Sunni traditions say it's fine to take from other cultures as long as you know what you're doing. And Imam al-Ghazali also had this purpose of using the thought world of the ancient Greeks in order to appeal to an elite in the cities of the Islamic world at the time that had been kind of intoxicated by that way of thinking, and that whose cognitive frame, whose way of appreciating the world, was based on those categories. Just as today, if you're a Muslim working in university and you're writing a book, you have to use the categories of modern Western academe, or the book won't find a publisher, it won't be well reviewed. It's just one of the rules of the game. So to inhabit somebody else's discursive space, to speak somebody else's language, is something that Muslims do, and it's part of what Sunni Islam has historically been. So the Wali Songo, in the extraordinary epic in Java, which becomes like a kind of beacon which sends out rays of light throughout the region, are doing something similar. They actually really know the culture of their people. They really understand the details of how the traditional Javanese soul experiences the divine. And because of their conviction that these people were in fact encountering something authentic, which is the basis of all of their teachings, even though the language was something that was in many ways damaging them, they were able to use the language, as Imam al-Ghazali had done, taking out certain things that are invalid and impossible from the Islamic Tawheed perspective, and taking out a whole load of rituals that are not necessary in the covenant of Islam, and giving them this bridge. It's a brilliant achievement. So if you look at the stories of the Wayang Kulit and the other ways in which the Javanese in particular experience their story, you find stories from the Ramayana, from the Mahabharata, and also some Islamic stories like the story, the Dastan of Amir Hamza, which had been taken through Indian, Central Asian sources with a lot of legendary materials and became a firm favourite amongst the Javanese villagers. And the things that are flagrantly incompatible with Islamic belief, reincarnations, certain strict social hierarchies, certain rules about what you can eat and what you can't eat, are airbrushed out of those stories. And Islamic themes and names are inserted. Sunan Qudus, one of the geniuses of this process, because ours is a time when narratives are already withering. Everybody's story seems to be being forgotten. The older generations know it better than the younger generations. The younger generations are following the latest movies on their smartphones and listening to the latest music, and they're part of a globalized reality. And that globalized reality isn't actually anybody's culture in the first place. We tend to think of it coming from Hollywood, perhaps. But the kind of stories that come out of Hollywood are not actually indicative of the deeper American style of life. They are indicative of whatever story the filmmaker thinks he can spin in order to hold people's attention. And there's going to be a lot of killing, and a lot of sexuality, and a lot of betrayal, and a lot of the biggest human beings are entranced by that. That's human nature. But it's not really the American story in Hollywood. So there is no culture any longer for a lot of young people. And you see it in the UK with a lot of students. Who do they belong to? What do they belong to? They're rootless. Modernity is very totalizing in its inability to accommodate not just the theory of multiculturalism, but its actuality. Nothing could be further from the modern reality than what Islam achieved at its best in the islands of the Nusantara, where the diversity was not suffocated, but despite eventual preponderance of Muslimness, expanded. The Buddhists became a really very small percentage of the population of Indonesia, like 1% now, but there are still indigenous Buddhist communities in Java. It expands, the religious spectrum expands as a result of Islamization. In the modern world, everything kind of collapses because there's a single way of being modern. Despite all of the lifestyle options which we're told about, and the modern world is almost made insane by the proliferation of options. In England now, they're even teaching 4-year-olds that when they're old enough, they'll be able to choose their own gender. Because this is the liberal idea of maximizing human flourishing by giving people as many choices as possible. More and more people having sex changes, more and more people experimenting with different sexualities. And now if you apply for jobs very often, there's a pull-down menu on the website, and there can be up to 10 different genders which you can identify with, or you click other and invent your own gender. You're free, why not? And it's kind of rude to say that is going to confuse a lot of young people. In any case, we have, as a result of this dislocation of human beings from the traditional coordinates that gave them a sense of security and stability, a sense that they could identify with the values and the worldview of their grandparents, their great-great-grandparents, a sense of community and continuity which is essential to human beings who have always been tribal people and know that the genes that are in their blood actually mean something and are not randomized, but they actually owe things to their grandparents. And modern genetics is increasingly indicating how much our behavior even is influenced by who our ancestors are. It's true. And Islam has always known this. But modernity can't make anything of that because the lifestyle of one's grandparents is so different. And their values were sexist and patriarchal and who knows what. We can't identify with them. So we're orphans. Everybody now is an orphan. And the deeper traditions of place, of dialect, of neighborhood, of a localized access to the sacred, of local holy places, of pilgrimage sites. In Europe, many of those went out with the Reformation, which is a long time ago now. The landscape of sacred England was basically crushed by Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Monasteries shattered, the shrines wiped out. It was devastation. In the vision of the Wali Songo, we find an alternative horizon. We find a way in which the universalism and the non-negotiable monotheism of Abrahamic religion can cause what is local to flourish and thrive and find new meaning. In other words, their own language suddenly bursts into flower. And the same for Turkish literature. Hardly any of it from the pre-Islamic period, and that which there is a few shamanistic incantations. Very little. And then suddenly the Turks have this gigantic literature. Nabi and Fuzuli and the rest, miracles. And so it is with the languages of Africa. And so it is everywhere the hand of Islam goes, whatever it touches it turns to gold. These signs are made more sign-like. They indicate heaven more fully. It's not some kind of nationalism. Instead, it is, as it were, a patriotism for one to be Muslim in those languages. Because it is only in the Islamic register of those languages that the full potential of that language comes to be. Much more could be said about this, but when that process reaches the Nusantara, we find the fluorescence of the languages of the region. Javanese literature, Malay literature, Madurese literature, so much of it still not really known. For some reason, there are some people here who don't know much about the richness of their indigenous literary traditions. The Islamic Manuscripts Association has an office in Cambridge. They're at their wits' end because of all of those libraries in Sumatra with thousands of books. But the climate is not really very good for manuscript conservation. It's not like the Middle East, which is dry and you leave a book in a box and it's there in 3,000 years. In this climate, you need to be careful. And much of that literature is now gone, almost gone. The old pondots, they'll show you the old manuscripts, but you can hardly open them any longer. They're green with mold, and who knows now. It's like Alzheimer's. The community's deep memory is going. That's a great shame and a great tragedy. But in any case, whether it's conserved or not, whether its people relate to it or not, everybody knows that it's a great literature. So this is another of the gifts that the Wali Songo are bearing to their people. They are saying the Javanese style, in its complexity and its depth and its Indic ambiguities and its intense consciousness of the supernatural nature of the natural world, can be made true to what is best in itself through the path of Islam, through wayfaring in Bara, in the Islamic way, in the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Javanese see this and they realize it and they accept it. They're not being reinvented as some kind of Arabian diaspora. And the tendency of some Muslims nowadays to try and imitate the outward forms of the Arab way is a misunderstanding of what the religion brings. The Urf and the Ada are legitimate sources of Islamic life and Sharia. Islam is not some kind of Arab imperialism, as some of its enemies nowadays are claiming. So the message of the Wali Songo is that you can come to God better than any way you've ever imagined before. You can discover the God who is mercy through this way. Remember that one of the names of Solon Ampel was Radin Rahmat. He's the man of Rahmah, mercy. These are not harsh figures. These are people who make allowances, who are inclusive, who find rukhsas while being people of tahajjud and Quran and severe with themselves. And in the context of the worship of Shiva, the predominant religion in the region, in the main islands before Islam, again, this is a very good way of connecting people, because Shiva is the merciful personification of Brahma. Vaishnavite Hinduism often worships Vishnu in a kind of rigorous judgment type or punisher mode. But Shiva is principle of mercy, and also there's aspects of that Brahman called it converted Java, and their great poems, Tombol Ati and others, converted Java and melted souls. And the discourse of Tawheed made so much sense to people who are confused by Indic complexities, certainly. But the real impact which they made was in their personal holiness and the undoubted working of Karamat and their healing people and of their embodying of the prophetic and the divine quality of compassion. Holy Prophet ﷺ sent Rahmatan lil Alameen, and those who claim to walk in their footsteps and follow his sunnah only do so validly rather than aberrantly if they are people of mercy. If you're not following the way of mercy, you're not following the way of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. However many times you may say your prayers. Mercy is what the world is made of. Mercy is the preeminent quality of the divine. Mercy is the principle with which the Holy Prophet ﷺ was sent, and the believers are to be merciful amongst themselves. This is the ummah of mercy. If you make it into anything else, then you no longer have the ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and you just have a combative, angry, egotistic principle whose impulses are more akin to the impulses of the Jahiliyyah and its fanatical tribalism and xenophobia than to the mercy, but the transcendent wisdom and the boundary keeping of the Sharia of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So that's the point on which I wish to end, because it was the note with which we began, the primacy of mercy as the quality of the Islamic saint, of the wali,
who is the one who is close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has created the whole world out of his rahmah, and whose supreme prophet is himself the embodiment of rahmah. They brought rahmah to their people, and that's why we're here today, and that's why we remember them, and we make the dua that their way, inshallah, will be revived, and that the wisdom and the subtlety and the inclusiveness and compassion and also Qur'an-mindedness of those people should be the watchword with which the Muslims of this region and around the world advance into the no doubt turbulent and complex times which lie ahead. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.